Hello, welcome back to the channel and video number 89. This episode is going to cover the SDS intake flange kits for Lycoming engines, explain some of the problems with the original Lycoming setup, the advantages of the SDS flanges, and how to install them. So hopefully you find this informative and interesting. So here's the factory Lycoming intake flange setup. And the biggest problem with them is the design. You can see how the tube sits proud of the flange here slightly. And there's just no way they're ever going to seal really well for a long period of time. When you tighten the bolts down at the edges, it tries to warp the flange, and you don't end up with good sealing in the middle of the flange, only at the ends. So you can see where it's been leaking here. And if you want to clean the surface, it's better to drag the chisel this way rather than scrape the other way. There's less chance of gouging the surface. And here's the SDS Billet Flange Kit. Consists of the flanges, support rings, Viton O-rings, nitrile hoses, and constant tension clamps to replace worm-type clamps. These don't require retightening. And we normally stock these flanges in gold, red, and clear anodized finish. We can custom anodize in other colors if desired. And this photo shows how the support ring and the O-ring fit inside the recess, and this is the part that seals against the head and the flange. Here we see the sequence of events, putting the flange onto the tube first, followed by the constant tension clamps, followed by the induction hose. We like to apply a little bit of oil just to the inside of the recess on the flange. It helps the O-ring slide into place more easily. Here we're fitting the tubes and flanges up to the cylinder head, just tightening the nuts by hand first, getting them in place. Before we get the flange nuts too tight, we want to get the induction hose in place on the sump just to hold things more stable and straight. And here's the O-ring support ring. The O-ring is designed to sit in the center of this contoured recess so it doesn't slide off. And here's the O-ring in place on the support ring. Notice the gap between the cylinder head and the flange here, and we're going to carefully insert the assembly of the O-ring and the support ring in between, making sure we've got it down into the recess properly, sitting straight into the recess. So you can use a small screwdriver to get the O-ring into the recess properly. It should drop down into the center. And now we're just going to progressively tighten the nuts up here. First one, then the other, just get it to go in evenly. And you can final torque them to the torque specs in the instructions. The final step is putting the constant tension clamps over the induction hoses. And we have these induction hoses oiled quite well. Normally you wouldn't do that, but just for the video to make them slide down the tubes easier. We're just using channel locks here. Of course you can use dedicated snap ring pliers. They're a lot nicer to use, but these work. You shouldn't have to touch them very often. Here's the O-ring and support ring against the cylinder head face, and this seals against the face and the face of the induction tube where it's formed 90 degrees. And the flange clamps this all down in place, holding it firmly. Here you can see the factory Lycoming flange in place, and on the right the SDS flange. While you're addressing your intake leaks, you might also want to address your valve cover leaks. You can see the factory Lycoming with the cork gasket here and the embossed cover. It gets cut by the valve cover. And here's the SDS one with the O-ring seal. And they look a lot better, they're a bit lighter, and you show off your engine a bit. That's it for this one. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.